Hello and welcome to another Video Manna. I'm Pastor Jeff Glenn, and it's my pleasure to take you through the Word each week. We are coming out of Genesis chapter 46, where finally Joseph is reunited with his father and brothers in the midst of this famine that's been going on for 2 years. As his family is coming back into the land, we see Joseph intercede for them with Pharaoh in announcing that they're back and kind of pre-wiring him to receive them. And that's exactly what happens. And so coming into verse 47, we see where Joseph is bringing his 5 brothers and then eventually his father to Pharaoh after going to him and setting up their return first. And then when they return, going to them, helping them with the language to be able to tell Pharaoh what they're there for, which is that they are herdsmen and that they'll be given a place of their own with this. And that's exactly what happens. We see that Pharaoh is pleased with Joseph's brothers, and he gives them the best of his land. And after that, he even asks Joseph, hey, if there's any among your brothers who are excellent herdsmen, then put them over my own livestock. And this is a great thing for them coming out of their homeland through this famine into an unknown place, into Pharaoh's Egypt. So we know that Pharaoh was not known. These pharaohs are not known for necessarily being so inviting. And so it's interesting how the Lord has set Joseph up as this intercessor for his family. And we see that indeed this is going to be one of God's greatest provisions for his promise of making Abraham a great nation and then passing that promise through to Isaac and then to Jacob. Because, as we'll see, as you read through Genesis chapter 47, that the famine is indeed long and it is indeed brutal on the people of the region. And so we have all these peoples of the region who are coming into Egypt because there's no ability for them to grow crops because of the famine. And because of Joseph interceding for his family, they're set up in the land of Goshen, one of the better parts of Israel, and Joseph is able to provide for them out of the stores that he had brought in on the good years of harvest to be able to provide for them. And so they're set up in the land, and as a result, they're able to start multiplying. And so from this roughly 70 to 100 people, we see this great nation over 430 years is multiplied from roughly 70 to 100 up to several million because of the area that they're placed in. The other thing that this was a provision for them is they didn't have to start selling their stuff or paying money. As we'll see as you read through this, the people around Egypt came to Egypt and they first had to buy the grain with money, which is reasonable and acceptable, and it's not evil in any way. But once they ran out of money, then they started trading their land for this grain so that they could survive. And what we see here is 2 things. Really, when things get tough, we really get to see what's important. And so it isn't money and it isn't stuff. And then eventually we see that they went to Joseph and they said, we're going to die. So verse 19, why should we die before your eyes? Both we and our land. Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be your servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate. And it continues in verse 20, then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every man of the Egyptians sold his field, because of the famine was so severe, so the land became Pharaoh. And as for the people, he moved them into the cities from one end of the borders of Egypt to the other. And so it goes on to say that the priests of Pharaoh, they were given rations as well. And so they didn't have to sell their land. They didn't have to buy grain. But what that meant was, at least in that culture at that time, this false worship of the many gods that they had, and Pharaoh being seen as a god, we see that Jacob and his family being set up in the land of Goshen is on par with the priest, because they're provided for out of the king's storehouses. And so this kind of elevation to this place on the cultural front of Pharaoh and Egypt is the provision for them to be able to grow. And as we move through the famines getting worse and worse, we see that as the people come to Joseph and they're like, we don't have anything left. We've already given you all our money. We've already given you all of our land. And now we're going to give you our labor. And so Joseph, being both a man of God, but also as a faithful worker to Pharaoh, he doesn't exploit the people, but he also doesn't cheat his boss. So he sets up this taxation system in which that they will give Pharaoh 1/5 of the proceeds of the land from the seed that they'd given, and they were able to keep 4/5. So that's about a 20% tax. And so if you kind of count up all the taxes in our day, that might be not too bad of a deal to be reduced down to 20% taxes total. So at any rate, so Joseph is faithful to the Lord in first interpreting the dream and seeing that there's 7 years of good, plentiful harvest would come, and then seeing the 7 years of famine and being given the wisdom to store up extra just for a time as we see here, and then being able to fairly deal with the surrounding area so that massive starvation didn't happen, but also that Pharaoh was rightly served and his family was provided for. And so we see now that Jacob is coming to the end of his life, and he's now come through the famine, and it's 17 years since he came into Egypt, and he's 147 years old. And the time he knows he's getting ready to go, and so he calls his son to him, and he makes him vow one thing, that when he did pass, that he would not be buried in Egypt. He wanted to go back and be buried in the cave at Machpelah, where he had purchased, and Abraham and Isaac were buried. And indeed, Joseph would be faithful to do that, and as we'll see coming up. But in all of this, the encouragement here is the provision of the Lord to, even in the hard things, make a provision for his people. And so until next week, stay encouraged and stay in the Word.